You send someone ahead to prepare the hotel room for you.
It's called preparing the sexy.
Is the music industry about to fall with the indictment of Sean Combs? Questions are circling about who else might be wrapped up in these allegations of sex trafficking, racketeering, and assault. But we're going to break down the potential fallout with an attorney to the music stars, Bradford Cohen. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is a Law and Crime legal alert. So recent studies have uncovered a link between Depo-Provera, aka the Depo shot, and an increased risk of brain tumors. Lawsuits are being filed against Pfizer, the manufacturer of Depo-Provera, alleging that they failed to warn patients and doctors about this risk and instead rushed the drug to market while downplaying the adverse event reports. So if you've been diagnosed with a brain tumor or you're experiencing symptoms like headaches, vision problems, seizures, or other neurological issues, you may qualify for compensation. And Wright & Schulte, one of our legal sponsors, is a national firm helping those injured to ensure their claims are thoroughly presented. Visit deposhotclaims.com/sidebar to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. One of the main questions that has come out from the arrest and indictment of Sean Diddy Combs is what will be the ripple effects? Who else will be caught up in this case? Who else may be implicated in Combs' alleged criminal scheme, whether as a witness, maybe as a potential co-defendant, and more specifically, we have to wonder if those are going to be major players in the music industry. That was Combs' industry, after all. Rap mogul, music mogul, producer. He hung out with music industry icons for years. So we want to think about that. And think about that for a second, because Combs is currently sitting in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center as he awaits trial on racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, and by nature of those charges, when you think about that, Combs, if you believe the prosecution's case, couldn't have committed these alleged crimes on his own. I mean, for conspiracy, he needs to have agreed with someone else to engage in these criminal activities, to further the goals, to carry out the interests of this alleged criminal enterprise. Prosecutors have said in their filings there are co-conspirators, that he had those facilitate the sexual abuse and sex trafficking of women. Combs is accused of orchestrating these freak-offs, these elaborate sexual performances that he would watch or participate in, where he would force women to engage in sex acts with male sex workers. So who else was involved? If this campaign of sex trafficking, assaults, threats, violence, obstruction, forced labor, kidnapping, arson has been going on for years, as prosecutors allege in their indictment, who helped? Maybe at the very least, who was aware of what was allegedly going on? And you have to wonder if there are those in the music industry, more specifically, that will get caught up in this. And what really got me thinking about this is that there was a piece in the Irish Star, and a source apparently told the Irish Star the following. Huge music stars have been lined up to talk during the Diddy's case, as fans fear it could spell the end for hip-hop. 90 stars who were huge during Diddy's heyday and worked with him in the late Biggie Smalls are said to have been approached by authorities to talk. It could open up a can of worms. The way things are going, it could spell the end of hip-hop. Should these stars choose to talk and divulge information, then the industry could become even more tainted. They rolled with Diddy and Biggie at the time, so their version of events will be invaluable, as there's so many sides to this story. Well, to talk about this, I want to bring on somebody who has represented a lot of high-profile music stars like Drake, Kodak Black, Travis Scott. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen, infamous attorney, friend of the show. Great to see you, Bradford. Let me start with this statement from the Irish Star. What do you make of that? Is this, you think there's high-profile people in the music industry who are maybe worried right now? Do you think that this could be the end of hip-hop? What's your take on it?
I don't think it's going to be the end of hip-hop. I think hip-hop goes far beyond Sean Combs. So I don't think it's going to be the end of hip-hop. What I think that's going to happen is that a lot of people are probably worried, very worried. I think that just not music industry. I think that also people in the entertainment field as well, because Sean Combs he had a net that went very, very deep into Hollywood, into producers, into actors, into musicians. And I think everyone wanted to go to a Diddy party at one point in their careers because that was kind of like the thing. in the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember I knew people that were invited to Diddy parties. I was never invited to a Diddy party. And I thought to myself at the time, boy, I wish I could go to a Diddy party. And now I'm so happy that I never did. But yeah, I think that the worrisome part here is that you have an individual who's sitting in jail. That never helps the psyche. They start offering deals. They start asking, talking to the prosecutors. I don't think he's going to cut a deal. But listen, I've been wrong on that before. I've saw people that I thought were like real guys that would never flip, never turn, aka Sammy the Bull, aka any of those guys. And you think these guys would never turn. They're never going to give up that lifestyle. They're never going to turn, and they end up turning. And in today's society, it's not that big of a deal. Back in the 90s and the 2000s, snitch, snitch, snitch was a big deal. And now you see most of these guys flip, and it's not that big of a deal. Now, do I know if he's going to flip? No. Do I think that that he may? It's always a possibility. But I think for him, it's more of clearing his name. So I think he's going to go to a trial. And then at trial, if he takes the stand, I think, yeah, people should be worried because he's probably going to mention some names that I'm sure were unindicted co-conspirators or cut deals with the government, and you're going to see a flood of individuals, including, I think, Cassie. They're going to probably have some dirt on her as well to say that she was a willing participant in all these things and that she helped organize these things and things of that nature.
Well, I think the bigger picture, you make some great points there, particularly about whether or not he's going to take a deal, because the idea of him accepting a deal, there would have to be prison time attached to that, and significant prison time. I don't think that he would, at this point, it seems surprising he would agree to that. But as you said, we can't be 100% sure. But the reason I also thought about this topic is because Charlemagne, the radio host, said that when Combs was indicted, he says if he gets racketeering and sex trafficking for freak-offs, there are going to be others involved. And it made me think the idea of, look, there is a difference from a legal point of view. Diddy has a wild party versus Diddy committed illegal freak-off sex parties, with drugs and forcing people to be a part of it, and sex workers. But a part of me wondered, is this what he's being accused of very commonplace in the music industry? Maybe not to the degree of freak-offs, but should other people be concerned that this was the norm in the industry? And if they're going after Sean Combs, whether or not they're even part of this case, could they be prosecuted separately for what they allegedly did in similar situations?
Sure. You've seen kind of a ripple effect in terms of other people being sued civilly for different accusations. Not as bad as Sean Combs, but you did see a little bit of the door opening where people were like, okay, we can file these lawsuits. A lot of these lawsuits are just not, they don't make any sense, or they're not put together well, or they're not represented by the right attorneys. They're just attorneys that kind of jump on the bandwagon as opposed to attorneys that specialize in this kind of thing. I don't know if it's quote unquote the norm. I think that this was kind of his thing in terms of these white parties, in terms of these different kind of parties. I think maybe in the Playboy Mansion days, maybe there were some things that went on in Hollywood that not everyone was privy to, not everyone knew what was going on. But I don't think that is prevalent in that world. I think it was more of, this was kind of, Sean Combs was known for not quote unquote freak offs, but these white parties and these different parties in the Hamptons and these different parties around the country, in Miami and in LA. I don't see that being prevalent throughout the industry. Certainly the people that were partaking in the sordid side of those parties, like I said, should probably be worried, because I would imagine that the women that are testifying against Sean Combs are probably going to be naming other names as well if there was other individuals that were there. But you haven't seen those lawsuits come out, right? You haven't seen the Busbys of the world, suing these other actors or other musicians. And I think that would be where the next shoe would fall, if it would fall at all.
It was interesting. Radar Online reported, and so take this with a grain of salt, but they basically said that music icon Clive Davis is in panic mode because of his connections to Sean Combs, and it's kind of more of a specific example of what we're talking about, people who might be concerned about having any connections to Sean Combs. But I think it goes to this larger question. If you were around Sean Combs and let's say you knew what was happening, and that could be an allegation, you knew what was happening, and not saying that's the case with Clive Davis, but if you saw and knew, but you didn't do anything, not that you participated, but you saw and you knew and you didn't do anything, I think you don't even want to be mentioned in the same sentence as Sean Combs, even if you're not being criminally charged. But if you saw and knew, how much trouble would you be in? I guess that's different than being an enabler, or is it an enabler?
I don't think it's really an enabler. I mean, you'd have to have some sort of participation to be criminally liable, right? It's just if you saw it and you knew that was going on. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I'm sure knew what Harvey Weinstein was up to and knew it was like a joke in Hollywood. I think I watched, a series on Harvey Weinstein and people were joking like, hey, everyone knows not to go up to Harvey Weinstein's room. So a lot of people probably knew what the basis of that joke was. The same, I'm sure that people know about, different things about Sean Combs. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be liable in a criminal sense. Certainly the court, the court of society will look upon that very poorly. Right. And I think that I think more people are worried about that losing their deals, losing their jobs, losing, different kinds of money streams. I think that's a bigger worry for a lot of people.
Let me give you an example. And we don't know how much the civil lawsuits are actually playing a role in the criminal case, whether or not the people who have already sued Sean Combs will be government witnesses. But assuming for a moment, let's say you have somebody because by the way, in the indictment, it doesn't name names. It doesn't even mention specific episodes. But the civil lawsuits are pretty specific. So let's say, for example, Dawn Richard, who filed the lawsuit against Sean Combs, decides that is a government witness in his criminal case. In her complaint, I want to read you what it says. It says, in the weeks and months leading up to the Bad Boy Interscope deal, Mr. Combs had frequent meetings with producer and then CEO of Interscope Records, Jimmy Iovine. On one such occasion, Combs hosted a dinner at a West Hollywood, California restaurant. Among the guests at the dinner were celebrities like Neo and Usher, as well as Mr. Iovine. At the dinner, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura, meaning Cassandra Ventura, who, by the way, is probably a star witness for the prosecution. At the dinner, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had an argument. In front of the dinner guests, Mr. Combs hissed at Miss Ventura in a screaming whisper and forcefully punched her in the stomach, causing her to double over in visible pain, crying. Miss Clark escorted Miss Ventura out of the restaurant, and Mr. Combs remained and continued socializing with the dinner guests. So if you have Cassandra Ventura recounting that on the stand in Combs' criminal case, or you have Jimmy Iovine being called as a witness, or you have Neo being called as a witness, or you have Dawn Richard being called as a witness, and you're seeing these high-profile people in the music industry who are alleged witnesses to what's going on but didn't do anything more. As going back to what you said, that could be problematic for them, not necessarily on a legal front, but from a PR point of view.
Yeah, especially Jovine, the guys that are still in the business, that still are making money from the business, that still have a name in the business. I think that is the most worrisome. The guys, I think, from the 90s that, made their money and kind of are on, coast and getting, residuals and things like that. No one wants to be associated with this whole thing. No one wants to take the stand and have to testify. But I think they have less in terms of judgmental stuff going on in society than, the guys that are still in the hip hop world, still in the musician world. I think they are the ones that probably don't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You don't want people to think that you willingly participated or that you unwillingly participated but said nothing. I think that's a bigger thing where you just kept your mouth shut, because I think in today's society, that will be one of the things that you'll be judged on, not criminally, but certainly in the court of public opinion.
How much do you think the government is reaching out to these high-profile people in the music industry? A, whether they've been mentioned by witnesses or alleged victims, or B, if they're on the tapes. So the government says they have videotapes, digital evidence that will corroborate the witness testimony, that will show evidence of these freak-offs. If you're on that tape or someone mentioned you, do you think the government is reaching out to everybody? I mean, that seems like a monumental task.
I do. I think they're probably reaching out to all those individuals. You know, what we consider monumental, the government considers a day at work. You know, they have unlimited resources. They have unlimited amounts of individuals that can help them reach out to these individuals. They have all of the FBI, all of their Southern District of New York. It is an awesome power, and being on the other side of that and witnessing what they can accomplish within a 24-hour period, I can tell you that I think they are reaching out to those individuals. I think they're covering all their bases. This is a very high-profile case, and when it comes to high-profile cases, a lot of pressure, and that pressure is to deliver, right? And to deliver, you want to make sure every rock is turned over, every stone. And I think that, yes, they're going to reach out to everyone they possibly can and everyone that could possibly testify in their favor.
And it's not just the government. I have to imagine that one of the other concerns is, you mentioned civil lawsuits, being named in upcoming lawsuits, because we know that there is this Texas attorney named Tony Busby, says he plans to file lawsuits on behalf of 120 alleged victims of Sean Combs, including those who say they were minors when they were abused. And in fact, by the way, 6 suits were already filed at the beginning of the week, claiming that Combs sexually assaulted a minor, that there's multiple allegations of rape. This stems from 1995 through 2021. Various businesses where these alleged attacks happened are also named in the suit, like Macy's and Marriott. And Busby has indicated that in time, he will name names. He will go after the celebrities who either participated in the abuse or facilitated this abuse in some way, this alleged abuse. And he has claimed to TMZ that he has even sent out demand letters to high-profile people to settle before he files the lawsuits against them. He claims some people have already done that. Maybe there are people in the music industry. What do you think about that?
I don't doubt it. You know, I think that I think Mr. Busby has a way of he's very grandiose in the way that he presents his cases. He goes to the press prior to filing the actual lawsuit, which is unusual. I don't really see that happening a lot, and I don't know if I wouldn't doubt that he's willing to name names, and he probably has sent out demand letters to certain individuals. I don't know if those certain individuals have settled or not. Obviously, that's something that you will never find out about because there's probably NDAs signed. But I don't doubt that there are individuals that are being named that are famous or that have some sort of fame that would not want to be named, and I don't know what the evidence would be against them. But I think this individual's, Sean Combs, case has scared a lot of people. And I think that when you're in a situation where you're making, let's say you're making $10 or $15 million a year just in endorsements, you probably would settle a case for $5 to $10 million, not to lose that revenue stream of 10 to 15. And the thing is like I said, whether or not it has legs, doesn't have legs, is true or not true, there is a certain economic weighing that has to take place in everyone's mind, whether or not to sit and fight that charge, and knowing that if you do sit and fight that charge, if there's other individuals out there and then they get wind of this one lawsuit, then all of a sudden opens the floodgates. And I think that's what happened with Sean Combs with Cassie. I don't know how that all came about, but if I was given a complaint making the allegations that Cassie was making, and knowing the revenue streams coming in yearly, and that she was asking for, I think, $35 or $40 million, economically, it was probably smarter. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. But even at the time, economically, it was smarter to settle that case, whether or not, Sean Combs believed those allegations or not. Now, the dumbest part of that was to let the lawsuit be filed and then settle the same day or the next day. Yeah. That was the dumbest. because once you commit, you have to take a path. It's like Mr. Miyagi says, you walk on the right side of the road, you're okay. You walk on the left side of the road, okay. You walk in the middle, you get squashed like a grape. So it's the same thing when it comes to lawsuits. You either are in all out war mode or you're settling. There is no middle of the road, especially for me. So if you say to me, hey, I want to fight this, I didn't do it, this is blackmail, then you have to then fight that tooth and nail, take her deposition, get ready for war. And that's what he should have done. Because at a bare minimum, he would have at least gotten some discovery and things that he's not entitled to now, a deposition, things of that nature that now he can't get when he's in this federal situation, in this criminal federal situation. So I think that was very dumb. So like I said, in any situation, it's economical and it's a weighing factor and it's what you can live with. And it's something that sometimes you have to just do and move on. And that's just the society we live in.
Not only with Bradford do you get incredible legal analysis, you also get a Karate Kid reference. And that was not something that I expected, but it's something I needed. And I didn't realize I needed it until now.
I'm glad.
Bradford, I know you're a busy man. I wanted to ask you one more question about this.
Sure.
The defense. The defense could be, when you think about this and taking it 360 analysis of it, the defense could be, this was the music industry. This was the culture. It was wild, crazy sex parties, wild, but consensual. The issue I have with that is, how much can they expand that defense? Because would they have to admit, yes, there were drugs, yes, there were male sex workers, but again, everything was consensual? Because if you're admitting that, then essentially you would be admitting, Sean Combs would be admitting transportation to engage in prostitution. You're transporting sex workers for purposes of prostitution. And the prosecutors say they have the receipts, they have the payments, they have business records to back this up. Do you admit to all the drugs? Because that's actually one of the underlying crimes of the racketeering conspiracy case. So how much can they say all of this was consensual, this was the culture, this was the industry, without essentially admitting key elements of the crimes?
Correct. That's what makes this case so difficult, right? It's like, whenever it comes to these cases, and it's either you're representing, generally speaking, you don't get a lot of John cases. And this is considered a John case, right? That he's hiring hookers, males, females to fly in and do all these kind of things. You don't get a lot of John cases, but like when you represent individuals who are accused of, living off the proceeds of a prostitute, which is essentially pimping, right? If you represent those individuals, your defense is generally like, hey, everyone was making money, but it's like you're admitting to the elements. You're almost looking for a jury nullification. You're almost looking for a jury to say, hey, these guys and girls were hookers. They were getting paid $10,000 to show up and party and enjoy themselves and blah, blah, blah. No one complained at the time. It's almost like a jury nullification. That's what makes this case so difficult, is that he's going to have to admit to some of that stuff, because I think it's going to be very difficult not to admit to it. And I think he's going to put some blame on Cassie and everybody else, these people that are saying, hey, I was forced to do this. And I think you're going to find out during the course of the trial that those individuals that are turning on him now were some of the individuals that were probably not just participating, but probably assisting in procuring individuals and bringing people in and, things of that nature. And I think that's why, Cassie had to make a deal. And I think that's why ultimately she's testifying against Sean Combs. And also that when that video came out, it would be very difficult to charge her, right? Because that video came out, and I think I personally, and I don't know for sure, but I personally have the opinion that that was her team that leaked that. I don't believe it was the government. And I know they're making accusations that the government leaked that video. And I don't even think they had the video when it leaked. I think that Cassie's legal team probably leaked that video. And in order to to throw a blanket of innocence on her, that this is, and the video is horrible. I'm not making an excuse. No, I'm saying the video is probably one of the worst videos that I've seen. But that being said, I think that it was leaked to demonstrate that, she did not do anything of her own free will. And after that video came out, there is no prosecutor in the country that would have charged Cassie as a unindicted co-conspirator or as a co-conspirator at all.
It's unfortunately, look, on one hand, when someone makes an allegation, in a legal point of view, it's just an allegation. From a human point of view, from a PR point of view, she alleged some really heinous things against Sean Combs. And there was a lot of lawsuits that came, but it was that video that I think changed everything. It was the first time I think a lot of people said, there's something going on here. He really did, maybe did that. And look, just that video doesn't mean that he's guilty of sex trafficking or racketeering, but my gosh, did that change the whole story. Bradford Cohen, thank you so much for coming on. So good to see you. I mean, I always love having you on. I know you're a busy man, so really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.
I'm not going to talk about anything that I haven't said in court or in the papers. These are all great questions, but I'm just not going to get into it. So,
can you speak about your concerns about the leak and the video? You have spoken about that before.
I did it in the court papers, and I'm just going to stick to the court papers.
From a new trial date to allegations of government misconduct to issues surrounding an accuser to a third attempt to get out of pretrial detention, we are breaking down some major recent updates in Sean Diddy Combs' case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey guys, this is a law and crime legal alert. Recent studies have uncovered a link between Depo-Provera, aka the Depo shot, and an increased risk of brain tumors. And now lawsuits are being filed against Pfizer, the manufacturer of Depo-Provera, alleging that they failed to warn patients and doctors about this risk and instead rushed the drug to market while downplaying the adverse event reports. So if you've been diagnosed with a brain tumor or experiencing symptoms like headaches, vision problems, seizures, or other neurological issues, you may qualify for compensation. And Wright and Schulte, one of our legal sponsors, is a national firm helping those injured to ensure their claims are thoroughly presented. Visit deposhotclaims.com/sidebar to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. Look, I get it. It can be tough staying up to date on everything that is happening in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case. There is a lot that has been happening. So what we want to do for you is give you some of the top recent updates on the case so that you're caught up to speed. Now, before I even get into the updates, I have to set the stage. The 54-year-old music mogul, still locked up, still locked away in the Metropolitan Detention Center out in Brooklyn as he awaits trial on federal sex crimes charges, racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution. Essentially, prosecutors from the Southern District of New York allege that Combs used his business empire and resources and associates to lead a criminal enterprise that was engaged in illegal activity like arson, bribery, kidnapping, even the assault and sex trafficking of women, and that this was going on for years. And more specifically, they allege that he brought in male sex workers for these events called freak-offs, these elaborate sexual performances that he forced, threatened, or coerced people to be a part of, even drugging people, filming these sessions. That's what the allegations are. And it's a complicated case, which brings me to the first update. When on earth is this trial actually going to happen? Well, at a status hearing last week, prosecutors, the defense attorneys, and the new judge overseeing this case, the Honorable Arun Subramanian, agreed to a trial date of May 5th, 2025. Now, obviously, that can change. For a variety of reasons, but it seems to me that the defense has been pushing for this early trial date. I mean, we were suggesting this trial wouldn't happen until the end of 2025, maybe even 2026. But the reason that it seems to me that Combs is wanting an early trial date is because he's locked up. He doesn't want to be there anymore. And even though he is appealing his bail, or his denial of bail, I should say, to a new court, and we're going to get into that in a minute, he and his team may be thinking, let's get him to trial as soon as possible with the hope that he's acquitted and he can go home and put it all behind him. We don't want him languishing behind bars for another year or 2 years as he waits to go to trial. But there are a few things with that. You know what could change the trial date? You know what could delay it? If Combs is hit with new charges, if there is a superseding indictment, that's when prosecutors go back to the grand jury with new evidence in an effort to indict Combs on additional charges. They may also upgrade charges. They may even replace a charge. And that means more discovery, more evidence, more material that needs to be shared, more motions. The timeline would shift. You won't see a May 5th, 2025 date if he's ultimately hit with more charges. Very, very, very unlikely. And in a major update during that hearing, we found out that's not so far-fetched. Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson told the court that the investigation is very much ongoing and that there is a possibility of a superseding indictment. And why would that happen? Well, it could be that through their investigation, analyzing the digital and physical evidence they collected, speaking with more witnesses, including maybe new people who may have come forward, prosecutors may believe they have probable cause that Combs committed more crimes. And by the way, it's interesting during this hearing that prosecutors said their case as it currently stands will take them about 3 weeks, and the defense said their case will take them 1 week. First of all, if there's additional charges, that will change. But the current case taking 3 weeks, the defense saying they'll have 1 week. What that tells me is that the defense is going to mostly focus upon cross-examination of the government's witnesses instead of really calling witnesses of their own. I mean, maybe the defense will call these alleged male sex workers to say that all of these freak-offs were consensual, that no one was pressured, no one was threatened, no one was forced to do anything. And overall, that idea of this being all consensual seems to be what the defense's main theme will be, particularly if you believe that victim 1 in the indictment, who is not named, but a lot of us believe is Cassandra Ventura, Combs' ex-girlfriend, who accused him in a separate lawsuit of physically, sexually, and psychologically abusing her. In this criminal indictment, prosecutors say he sex trafficked victim 1 through force, fraud, or coercion, meaning forced her to perform commercial sex acts. Now, it would seem to me that if she were the government's star witness, Combs' defense attorneys would spend a lot of time cross-examining her, suggesting that everything was consensual, that she agreed to everything. And by the way, going back to the timeline here, yes, the government says that their case would take 3 weeks to prosecute, but does that account for the time that the defense would cross-examine their witnesses? How long would the cross-examination of a Cassandra Ventura take? Would it take several hours? Would it take a day? By the way, his defense attorney has also suggested that Combs may take the stand. Would that be the majority of the week as well? What would the cross-examination of Sean Combs take? So even though we're saying it could be 4 weeks, I would imagine it would take a little bit longer. By the way, going back to Cassandra Ventura, his defense team most certainly will cross-examine her, try to get her to say everything was consensual. That yes, she was his girlfriend. Of course Combs flew her around. Of course he had sexual activity with her, but he didn't pay her. He didn't promise her anything to engage in sex acts, that she was a willing participant in these essentially orgies. So the estimate from both sides of how long their case will be is very interesting, to say the least. But of course, again, that could change if there are new charges. Now, there was another major update that happened, and it was also addressed in this hearing. The defense's argument that the government engaged in misconduct. In a filing from last week, Combs' defense counsel blames the government, more specifically the Department of Homeland Security, of leaking information and making inappropriate comments to the media, and the defense is now asking for an evidentiary hearing to get to the bottom of all this. More specifically, they allege that the Department of Homeland Security agents leaked the infamous 2016 videotape of Combs purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura in a hotel hallway, which was published by CNN in May of 2024. And remember, that was after the raids on his houses by Homeland Security before his arrest. They say they leaked it. So Combs' defense counsel in this filing wrote, quote, "The available evidence makes a prima facie showing that the government, primarily through DHS, has engaged in a 7-month campaign with 3 objects. 1, preventing Mr. Combs from getting fair consideration by the grand jury. 2, preventing him from getting a fair trial, and 3, strategically leaking confidential grand jury material and information, including the 2016 Intercontinental videotape, in order to prejudice the public and potential jurors against Mr. Combs. Pretty startling allegation there, but they continue. The government's scheme to undermine Mr. Combs' rights to a fair proceeding has several methods and means. First, there has been a steady stream of false and prejudicial statements made by DHS agents to various press outlets over the last 7 months. For example, Combs' lawyers allege on March 27, 2024, 2 days after the searches of Mr. Combs' residences, an agent specifically identified as working for DHS made public statements to, among other media, the New York Post, that he believes there is a disturbing history of sex trafficking. We are responding to concrete, detailed, explicit allegations. This is not random. We didn't choose his name out of a hat. We had allegations that we're following up on. Second, Combs' lawyers write, the agents encouraged in a particularly brutal and public search of Mr. Combs' homes, during which they handcuffed Mr. Combs' innocent sons and then marched them before a news helicopter in the press. This was an apparent effort to convey that they had overwhelming evidence against Mr. Combs, justifying the public and brutal treatment of even his children, who were handcuffed and manhandled by federal agents armed with assault rifles. Third, government employees have repeatedly leaked grand jury information and materials to the press to raise public hostility against Mr. Combs in advance of trial. And when it came to the source behind the leak of the 2016 tape, Combs' lawyers wrote, an unrelated third party is not a likely source. If a person not in law enforcement were to leak the videotape to a news source, that person likely would have sold the tape rather than simply give it to CNN. So prosecutors, they responded to this by providing the court with a copy of an email that they had sent to Combs' lawyers on October 9th. And it reads, to be clear, to our understanding, DHS did not have possession of the videotape prior to CNN's publication of it. Only the government has authority to obtain grand jury material, and the video broadcast by CNN was not obtained through grand jury process. So very interesting there. Now at the hearing, Prosecutor Johnson said that all the defense is trying to do is exclude a damning piece of evidence, seemingly referring to the 2016 videotape. And that is something Combs' lawyers have asked for, because if this evidence was improperly leaked by the government, then there is an argument it should be suppressed, that it shouldn't come into Combs' trial. That would be a big win for him. Well, Judge Subramanian reserved ruling on whether to order an evidentiary hearing to sort all of this out. He said he wants to wait to review each side's arguments, which are due by November 7th, and then he'll see if a hearing is warranted. Now, what the judge did do during this hearing, and this is going to have an impact, is impose a gag order. Now, this was something that the defense had asked the court to do as well. They wanted to stop the government from disclosing material to the media. The federal prosecutors at the hearing were like, okay, we'll agree to that, but the defense, they need to agree to the same, because they say the defense hasn't been so innocent in all this. They called out Combs' attorney Mark Agnifilo for doing an interview with TMZ right after Combs was arrested in September, where he called the criminal case, quote, a takedown of a successful black man. Prosecutor Johnson said this sounded like he was accusing the feds of engaging in a racist prosecution. Johnson said statements of this sort seriously risk a fair trial in this case. So Judge Subramanian instructed Combs' team to propose an order that would govern public statements by both sides. And when reporters flocked around Agnifilo after this hearing, he definitely wasn't as forthcoming as he'd been in the past.
I'm not going to talk about anything that I haven't said in court or in the papers. These are all great questions, but I'm just not going to get into it. So
can you speak about your concerns about the leak and the video? You have spoken about that before.
I did it in the court papers, and I'm just going to stick to the court papers. As you guys all know, let me just finish. As you all know, I made a request today for what we were calling a gag order, and I'm not going to walk out of court and do anything other than live up to that.
Talk about his demeanor in jail and what it's been like.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to answer any more questions. I want to help you guys out, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go back and speak to my colleagues, and then I'm going to be
just
done.
tell us about the MDC and what it's like.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can we see him being transferred anytime soon? Can we see him being moved anytime soon, or?
Sir, which way are you headed today? Which way would you like to go? Okay, yeah, let's go this way.
Now, there was something else that happened during the course of this hearing that we have to address. The amount of discovery in this case. The prosecution indicated the vast amount of material for their forensic teams to extract and review. And I'll give you an example. Prosecutor Johnson said this week that 96 devices were seized in those March raids on Combs' properties. Phones, laptops, hard drives. 51 of the devices were from the LA raid, 36 were from the Miami raid, and 9 were taken from Sean Combs himself. In fact, 8 of the devices in that Miami raid contain over 90 terabytes of information. Think about that, 90 terabytes. What do you have, like 2 terabytes on your iCloud storage? Think about how much that is. And she indicated that extracting that data has been a process. The reporting indicates, though, that the prosecutors have been in constant contact with Combs' attorneys regarding this discovery. In fact, we learned that the government made its first production of material over to the defense on October 7th, so this is ongoing. And what the defense received was search warrants, Combs' iCloud reports, Combs' iPhone activity, so that's going to be a lot to go through as well. And the prosecution expects to turn everything over to the defense by December 31st. Again, given the sheer amount of data, it is surprising that we expect the defense to be able to go through all of this and be able to mount a defense by May 5th. Very, very ambitious, in my opinion. So to be clear, though, we don't know what all of this evidence contains, but at the very least, as based on reporting and prior comments from the prosecutors, they appear to be in possession of videotapes of perhaps the freak-offs, perhaps other alleged criminal activity, but there's probably text messages and photos and a lot to go through as well. Also, while discovery is due by December 31st, I will also let you know that the motions in this case are due by February 17th, 2025, oppositions by March, replies by March 10th, and then trial on May 5th. Again, ambitious. Assuming there are no snags, assuming there are no further issues, we'll see. Now, there is another update in this case that we have to talk about that wasn't addressed at that hearing. It's something that is happening in a different court. You see, Combs has appealed his denial of bail to a higher court, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And remember, 2 different judges already denied him pretrial release. They said given the gravity of the allegations, the weight of the evidence, the potential danger he is to society, the risk of flight, and moreover, allegations that he had been improperly contacting witnesses and alleged victims, Combs should not be let out pending trial. Well, Combs' attorney, Alexandra Shapiro, filed a motion for pretrial release last week with the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and Shapiro opened the motion by writing, quote, "This case does involve extreme and unusual circumstances, but none that typically foreclose bail or warrant forcing Sean Combs to defend himself from a prison cell. What is extreme and unusual about this case is that Mr. Combs was detained immediately after he was charged, even though he has been in the spotlight his entire life, with many of his purported antics and episodes being widely reported in the press and known to law enforcement authorities. Indeed, hardly a risk of flight. He is a 54-year-old father of 7, a U.S. citizen, an extraordinarily successful artist, businessman, and philanthropist, and one of the most recognizable people on earth. The sensationalism surrounding his arrest has distorted the bail analysis. Mr. Combs was not released pending trial, even though he offered to comply with restrictive conditions that would have prevented any conceivable risk of flight or danger. And remember, Combs had offered a $50 million bail package, putting up his Miami home and his mother's home as collateral, promised to stay in constant contact with authorities, only speak to certain people, would have visitor logs handed over to the court, only certain people would come to the house. He even proposed having a third-party security team monitor his house when he would be under home confinement. And in this motion, Combs denies the government accusations of obstruction. His attorneys concede, yes, he spoke with people about the civil lawsuits he was facing, but says he wasn't aware that the Southern District of New York was investigating him. And once he realized he was being investigated, the appeal motion says he made sure not to continue contact with those people. The motion reads, although the government vaguely described contact with 2 grand jury witnesses, it proffered no evidence of any threats or intimidation. The government could only state there were 14 total contacts between Mr. Combs and 1 witness and another witness who was contacted multiple times. Defense counsel explained those contacts involved no obstruction or witness tampering. For example, 1 witness contacted Mr. Combs, not the other way around. She reached out to Mr. Combs and told him, "I'm a grand jury witness." After Mr. Combs informed defense counsel, he was instructed not to contact the witness anymore and didn't. So Shapiro argues the prosecution didn't meet its burden to hold Combs until trial. They've raised a number of very compelling and interesting arguments. Not clear when the court will hear arguments on this or what a decision will be or when a decision will be handed down, but very, very interesting arguments put forward by Sean Combs' defense counsel. Now, I will say this. If Combs were to make bail, would he still want a May 2025 trial date? Would he not want to see this trial much later on? After all, he faces a significant risk and possibility of conviction and being sentenced to serious prison time, perhaps a minimum of 15 to 20 years behind bars if he's convicted. Why wouldn't he want to be on house arrest for as long as possible and try to delay this trial as much as he can? Now, he could feel confident in his case. Maybe he wants to hold the prosecution's feet to the fire. Maybe he wants to get this trial over with as soon as possible. But all I'll say is, if he's granted bail and he is released pending trial, do not be surprised if he then tries to delay the trial date. I just put in that warning. Now, I will say this. Mark Agnifilo did indicate that Combs is not trying to move from the MDC while he awaits the issue on bail. There was reporting that he was requesting to be transferred to a facility in New Jersey, but Agnifilo seemed to say that the MDC had been responsive, so it appears he is going to stay there as he fights this bail issue. And when we talk about major updates in the Sean Combs case, as we talk about potential new charges, I would be remiss if I didn't mention another major update in the Combs case. A Texas attorney named Tony Busby announced that his law firm plans to pursue legal action against the music mogul. And this would be on behalf of more than 100 victims. More than 24 of those future plaintiffs say they were just kids when Combs allegedly assaulted them, including a 9-year-old. And attorney Busby says it's not just Combs caught up in the crosshairs.
The wall of silence has now been broken, and victims are coming forward. Our team has had at this point more than 3,285 individuals contact us with people claiming to have been victimized by Sean Combs. We now represent 120 individuals who intend to bring civil claims in civil court against Sean Diddy Combs, as well as claims against many other individuals and entities that we will name as defendants as we file these individual cases. I expect that through this process, many powerful people will be exposed. Many dirty secrets will be revealed. We know what we are potentially up against. As is always the case in situations like this, when a celebrity is involved, people can be downright mean and nasty. You'd be shocked at the length fans will go, no matter the evidence to the contrary, to defend celebrities they love. I mean, there's a reason for this word fans. They're fanatics. I've personally already been threatened multiple times on social media. And when I agreed to pursue this, I expected as much. This isn't my first rodeo. But victims who step forward to have their voices heard should not be subjected to that kind of conduct. They should not be targeted.
And by the way, according to TMZ, Busby has already sent out demand letters to a bunch of celebrities in order to get them to settle before he files lawsuits against them. Those, he says, who were complicit or participated in this alleged abuse by Sean Combs. And he also claims that some high-profile people have already settled. Now, he says that he's going to first file lawsuits against corporate entities who facilitated the abuse and then file the lawsuits against the celebrities. So it's going to be a very interesting series of weeks ahead. But here's the thing, and I've said this from the beginning. Busby is the latest in a long line of accusations from other people who have sued Combs that claim he abused minors. And yet, nothing in his criminal indictment, nothing in Sean Combs' criminal indictment is about minors yet. Given this announcement, could we expect a potential superseding indictment to include such allegations regarding minors? Not only would that delay a trial date, but it would make Combs' defense much more complicated. There is no consent defense when it comes to minors. And legal experts I've spoken to have indicated, by the way, that Combs may move to stay, meaning pause, all of these potentially 120 lawsuits until the conclusion of the criminal case, which is something we have seen before. And finally, one more update for you on the civil front that may affect the criminal case. And this is with respect to Adria English's lawsuit against Sean Combs. This is the person who claims that she was sexually assaulted and trafficked by Sean Combs at his infamous white parties. Well, her lawyers have withdrew from the case. And here's the thing. Her attorneys were Ariel Mitchell Kidd and Stephen A. Metcalf. Ariel Mitchell Kidd, as you might remember, has been making the news recently, most famously telling News Nation that a sex tape of Sean Combs and an unnamed high-profile celebrity is currently being shopped around. Now, what happened here? Well, English's former attorneys cited a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship and irreconcilable differences. In fact, Mitchell Kidd told the New York Times on October 3rd that, quote, she never lost faith in English's actual case, just in her. Mitchell Kidd said, her case is great. My issue was with her undermining my work and going behind my back doing things incongruent to advancing her case. But English seems to be celebrating that these attorneys are no longer on her case. In a statement over the weekend, English wrote, I am happy with the decision to withdraw, and this has made it easier for her to secure new professional non-clout-chasing counsel. Wow. Now, she has indicated that she has until November 11th to find new lawyers, or she will represent herself in this case. Now, we don't know if Adria English is a cooperating witness for the government's criminal case against Sean Combs or not, but when you see these headlines and you see accusations against attorneys who may be representing potential witnesses for the government, it does make you wonder about the credibility of these witnesses, no? What will cross-examination be like if perhaps Adria English is a cooperating witness and is going to testify against Sean Combs? Will she continue to be a witness? Interesting to think about. How strong is the prosecution's case? This is what I think about. Anyway, I think this is a good summation of where we are currently, the latest in Sean Combs' case. And as always, we will keep you updated on the very latest. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time. Is it likely that Sean Combs will take a deal, that he will never go to trial? What would that even look like? Why would he do this? Would turning on others make sense? Well, we're going to break down the top reason Sean Combs would take a plea deal in his criminal case, and we're going to bring on former R. Kelly prosecutor Nadia Shihada to break it down. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, since we learned about the federal charges facing Sean Diddy Combs when he was arrested and indicted last month, I'm talking racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, I have said from the very beginning, there is no way he's going to take a plea deal. No way. Why do I say that? I say that because I was convinced. Look at what prosecutors are alleging, right? They're alleging that he's at the top of a criminal organization, the criminal enterprise, that he was the one directing assistants, associates to participate in illegal activity, that he was engaged in a campaign of threatening, forcing, coercing women to engage in sexual activity, including these elaborate, many times drug-fueled sexual performances called freak-offs, that he was sex trafficking, exploiting, abusing women for years. So how could prosecutors work out a deal that wouldn't include significant prison time? I mean, currently he's facing, what, 15 years to life in prison if he's convicted? You think they would agree to a deal that would just be a slap on the wrist in order to avoid a trial? How could they justify that? How could they justify minimal prison time when, by the way, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, held a press conference after Combs was arrested, and he described the rapper and producer as essentially at the top of this criminal ladder.
Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
So in my mind, significant prison time has to be on the table in a plea deal. Anything less wouldn't really be justice, right? And because of that, it seems to me so unlikely that Sean Combs would agree to a plea deal because he wouldn't want to agree to any prison time. After all, it seems to me, based on him forfeiting his passport months ago, coming voluntarily to New York to surrender to authorities, knowing he was about to be indicted, trying to sell his plane, being in constant contact, or his attorneys being in constant contact with the prosecutors, he was doing everything in his power to avoid being locked up in pretrial detention. He didn't want it. He thought he was probably going to make bail, and that he probably thought he was going to be on house arrest. That didn't happen. He was denied bail twice. He's actively trying to get out of the Metropolitan Detention Center That's where he currently resides, by the way, as he awaits trial. He's now appealing this issue to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But why do you think he's pushing for a May 2025 trial date? Usually criminal defendants would push out a trial date to make sure they're as ready as possible to fight all the charges, including, by the way, charges as complex as this, and especially when you have so much digital and physical evidence to review. We're talking terabytes of information. Why seemingly rush to trial in less than a year for when you were indicted unless you really want to get out of jail as soon as possible? He may really think he has a great case that he can win, that he can put this behind him, that he can get out of jail. That's my opinion. So it seems unlikely, again, in my mind, Combs would agree to plead guilty and accept prison time, which again has to be quite substantial. Now, having said that, putting that whole monologue to the side, is a plea deal totally out of the question? Of course not. It happens. I was talking to acclaimed criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen about this on a previous sidebar, and he too feels like a plea deal is unlikely. But he also said he's been proven wrong about this. You never think that certain defendants would take a deal, and they do. So now the question we have for you here, what are some reasons that Sean Diddy Combs would take a deal? Is it likely to happen? Well, to answer that question, I want to bring in former federal prosecutor Nadia Shihata, one of the people who prosecuted and helped to convict R. Kelly of his federal sex crimes charges out in New York. Nadia, so good to see you. Thanks for coming back on.
Thank you for having me.
So I have laid out, I think, several reasons about why he might take a deal, and I'll go through them with you. But before we even get into what the reasons he could take a deal, is my analysis totally off about why I think it's unlikely he would take a deal?
No, I think you're spot on. He is facing a really significant prison sentence, and this is the type of case where I don't see prosecutors offering a really sweetheart type of plea deal that would involve anything less to including a plea to the most serious charge, which is the sex trafficking, which has a 15-year mandatory minimum. So in those circumstances, it's not very likely.
You know, one of the things I love about hosting Sidebar is the opportunity to speak with really smart, good lawyers, as you see here. And how can I highlight great lawyers without talking about Morgan & Morgan, our sponsor, America's largest injury law firm? And by the way, for a reason, they win a lot. I'm talking recent verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, $6.8 million in New York. These are all higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. There's no upfront fee to pay. The whole process can be done simply on your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. Now let's get into this world where it's a possibility he takes a deal. Reason number one. The case is just too strong against him. He doesn't think that he can win. Maybe cut his losses and take a deal. You tell me, do you think that that is a possibility when you, and to be clear, we don't know all of the evidence the prosecution has, but through their filings, they've talked about they've said how much physical evidence, digital evidence they have. Do you think that could be a reason? Let's expand upon that.
It can always be a reason. Look, one of the reasons defendants plead guilty in cases is because they know at the end of the day, if they're found guilty, they're going to be sentenced by a judge. And I think most defendants, it's rational to not want the judge who's sentencing you to sit through weeks and weeks of evidence coming out in excruciating detail, including from victims who testify, and remember that when they're sentencing you. It's much, you're kind of better off, even if, each side files voluminous sentencing materials. There is a difference between hearing from people on the stand and reading about what the allegations or the evidence would have shown at trial. And that can serve to benefit a person, at least marginally, potentially in sentencing.
So if we're talking about that it could be quite likely he's convicted of these charges, at a minimum, I know this might be tough given you're not a part of this case, you don't know all the details, we don't know all the evidence, but if he's looking at racketeering conspiracy, if he's looking at sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, if he's looking at transportation to engage in prostitution, if he's convicted across the board, I've mentioned what the range is, 15 years to life in prison, I believe. But realistically, What do you think he could be facing if he's convicted?
So, I mean, at least 15 years, but likely significantly higher than that, depending on how many, victims are involved, which we understand there's certainly more than one from what the prosecutors have said. And so that can all affect kind of the guidelines calculation. It could be in the realm of the R. Kelly case where he got 30 years on the racketeering. So something, 20 to 30 years, potentially even more.
And that's a life sentence. He's 54 years old. I mean, it's not a life sentence. He'd be in his 80s, but I mean, think about what we're talking about if we're talking about a 30-year prison sentence. And by the way, talking about the strength of a case, I mean, they've said they'll put on evidence to say this was all consensual. This wasn't sex trafficking. Nobody was forced into anything. There's no racketeering conspiracy. There's no criminal agreement, right? There's no criminal organization or enterprise. But at a minimum, do you feel like his attorneys are saying, listen, I don't know how we're going to defend against the last charge, the transportation to engage in prostitution. If prosecutors say they have records, they have payment receipts, they have travel records, it feels really hard to deny that he brought in sex workers for prostitution. And I think for that charge, he's looking at possibly 10 years in prison. So as we calculate how strong the case is and whether he's not going to take a deal, am I off about that? Because how do you defend against that last charge?
I mean, I think you're right that charge is the most difficult to defend against because it doesn't require, that much proof and certainly not force, fraud, or coercion. But it's also the least harsh potential sentence he faces. So it's anywhere from 0 to 10 years. And while the maximum is 10 years, that doesn't mean the guidelines will put him anywhere near that range. I suspect if by some miracle he were offered a plea to just that charge, that would be a plea he would consider. But I don't expect that it would be one that prosecutors would offer.
It goes back to that idea of justice. What's justice when you're saying he's at the top of this criminal enterprise? So let's now talk about another reason. And is it a possibility that prosecutors don't necessarily want to go to trial? It's time consuming. It's expensive. It's the issue of having these accusers to get up on the stand, relive what they have to say. It's a painful experience. I'm sure they would like to avoid trial, but would there ever be a situation where he gets minimal prison time? I guess the question is, what's the minimum that a plea deal would look like in terms of prison time?
With a case like this, unless something were to seriously go wrong with the prosecution's case or evidence, I don't see them making any offer that would not involve the sex trafficking charge, which would have the minimum of 15 years. I just think it's highly unlikely that would happen in a case, certainly one like this, where new victims are kind of coming out of the woodwork every day. There's so much publicity regarding the case. I think something would seriously have to be problematic about their evidence for them to offer something less than that.
That's significant. I mean, that even of itself is very significant. So that becomes like a lot of criminal defendants, they have to weigh, do I take this deal where I'm sent away for 15 years? He's 54, but 15 years is not 30 years versus going to prison for 30 years, 40 years. That's a difficult decision. Now, if he took a plea deal, and let's say he did get a minimum of 15 years, would he get any early release? Would that be possible under the federal guidelines?
So there's no parole in the federal system. There is something called good time credit. And so assuming you are incarcerated without any kind of serious infractions of prison rules and so forth, then you do get credit for your good time, meaning, so your sentence is ultimately reduced a little bit. And I can't remember kind of the exact calculation of what it is. It changed recently under the First Step Act, but it would kind of lessen it a little bit.
Let me go to another reason why he might take a deal. Maybe he doesn't want to go to trial for personal reasons. Maybe, trial's too expensive to go through. He's got all these civil lawsuits he's got to worry about. Maybe a trial would just be too emotionally tough for him and for his family. Maybe he doesn't want all of those details coming out at a trial. Is that a possibility?
Look, it's certainly a possibility. Everything's possible. And these are things that all defendants kind of have to consider when they're deciding how to proceed in a case. I'm not sure that consideration, though, here would weigh that strongly because there are so many civil lawsuits out there now that so much information about him is coming out anyway, or allegations at least, and that is really all in the public domain now. And those civil cases, whether or not he pleads guilty in the criminal case, will likely move forward. And so unless he settles all of them, more is likely to come out.
And the indictment, without even naming names, is pretty bad. I mean, it's hard to recover from those allegations. But I will ask you this. Talking about personal reasons about not going to trial, what about this? Would the government say to him, listen, if you take a deal, we won't charge any of your family members or friends, maybe even your sons, with criminal activity? We know there's allegations against these sons in civil lawsuits. Is that a deal that the government would put on the table? If you take a plea, Sean Combs, we won't go after your family?
That would be highly unusual. In fact, there's a policy in the Department of Justice against offering those types of deals. So I would be very surprised if a deal like that were to be offered.
Literally, I thought of it. I was brainstorming ways that that a deal might be on the table. There's no evidence to suggest that that's what they said. I just thought of it. I was speculating. So just want to make that clear. No evidence that the government has offered that or even thinking of that. Let me ask you this. What about the idea, and this has come up a lot, that Sean Combs would take a deal in exchange for revealing big names to give up bigger fish? And I think this one's interesting. Would the government work out a deal for him to cooperate against other high-profile people, other celebrities? And what's strange to me thinking about that is, isn't he at the top? Isn't he the biggest fish? I keep getting that question. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, so he's certainly alleged to be the top of his organization. It's certainly possible that he has information about other criminal activity involving even more people that are high profile or that could be of interest to the government. But I think, and certainly the government in all sorts of cases, mob cases, has, made cooperation agreements with people at the top of their criminal organizations, even people who've committed murders, and that happens all the time in federal cases. But it's usually, the prosecutor has to really believe they are getting some really good evidence and information to even consider something like that when someone is charged with these types of crimes and when they are alleged to be the head of the criminal organization.
And assuming it would be about this alleged conduct, would they even need him to testify or provide information, or is everything documented on tape, videos, digital evidence, text messages? What value would a Sean Combs cooperation be for them? I was also struggling with that as well, as we talk about if he could take a deal.
Yeah, it depends on what their other evidence is, which we don't have, a great insight into right now. But to the extent a lot of it is on video, then you're certainly not going to, as a prosecutor in a case like this, it's highly unlikely that you're going to enter a cooperation agreement with him to do what's known as cooperating down, to convict people that are lower on the chain. That's not what prosecutors generally do in these types of cases.
But if you think about it, just taking the government's allegations is true that he's the head of this criminal enterprise and he's involved with guns and he's involved with drugs. If he had connections to, again, this is purely speculating, I'm trying to think about it. If he knew about crime lords, if he knew about cartels, if he could lead the federal government to some really other kind of serious players in the game, murderers, would that be of something of interest to the government in working out a plea?
Potentially, without knowing kind of what that information is, it's hard to say. But, if his lawyers were to say, we have, he has information about X, Y, and Z, what generally happens is the prosecutors would ask for what's known as an attorney proffer to decide whether they want to proffer him and get this information straight from him. So they would start with that to see if it's the type of information that they would actually consider to enter into a cooperation agreement.
Now, I have another potential reason why he might take a deal. The idea that he would want to plead guilty to these charges in the hopes that no more charges come down the line. What do I mean by that? There has been a lot of talk about minors. And although he is not charged with respect to minors, soliciting minors, sexually assaulting minors, those are allegations that have been brought up in a lot of the civil lawsuits. Now, the federal government would have the opportunity to include instances with minors as part of the federal charges. We saw it with R. Kelly. We saw it with Jeffrey Epstein. We saw it with Ghislaine Maxwell. Is there a possibility the government could say, if you plead guilty to these charges, we will not bring additional charges against you, including charges with respect to minors, which, as you and I both know, is a lot tougher to defend? What do you think?
Yeah, so that question goes to what's put into what's known as the coverage paragraph in a plea agreement. And that basically is a standard part of most plea agreements, which says what the government, in exchange for your guilty plea, will not prosecute, will not bring charges against you for. And in a case like this, prosecutors might just put the charges they've already filed. So the other count, depending on what count of the indictment he pled guilty to, they would include just kind of what's set out in the indictment. But it is possible for the defendant to ask for other things to be included. And then it's a question of negotiation. Again, in a case like this where they are continuing to investigate, and we don't know what is included in their continuing investigation, but to the extent that they have already uncovered evidence about illegal sexual activity with minors, they may not be willing to put that in a coverage paragraph, or they might require him to plead guilty to that conduct, even if it's not currently in the indictment.
Yeah, because the prosecutors have indicated that that it's possible there could be a superseding indictment. And one of the things that was lacking in, or that was missing in this indictment was the current indictment was the fact there was nothing regarding underage people. I thought that was curious. A lot of my legal analysts I've spoken with said it was curious given the allegations that have been leveled against Sean Combs. So it made me wonder, do they have something else up their sleeve in an effort to, as a bargaining chip, to say, all right, this might be a way. I guess the difficulty of thinking about that, accepting a plea deal where they wouldn't charge him for those additional crimes, is that's not justice for the other alleged victims, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would certainly be a complaint about a plea deal like that. My guess is it was conduct involving minors was not outlined in the indictment because they didn't feel they had enough to bring such charges, at least at that point. But as I said, they've made clear they're continuing to investigate. I'm sure they're interviewing lots of people, and those charges may yet be to come. And that may be, one of the reasons that the defense team pushed for a trial date and one that was, is coming up quite soon at this point.
Nadia, before I let you go, will we know whether or not there were negotiations regarding a plea deal? Does that happen at any sort of status conference, any point in this federal criminal process where we will know that there were plea negotiations and they broke down? What was maybe offered, what was rejected? What will we know about that if that's ever on the table?
So sometimes the judge will ask about that in a status conference, whether any plea offers have been made. And so if they're directly asked, they will need to answer the question. In many federal cases, plea offers are routinely extended without any, asking for them by the defense. That, indictment happens, you send out a plea offer. This isn't one of those typical cases. I think because the defense has also made clear publicly that they don't intend to plead guilty, they're not going to say something different right now unless directly asked by the judge. And if something has in fact happened, then as lawyers, they'll have to answer truthfully, obviously, to the court.
All right. Well, Nadia Shihata, we will wait and see what happens. As I said, I think it's unlikely he's going to agree to prison time, but as he sits there in detention, waiting for trial, he may be feeling differently day in and day out, and we'll wait to see what happens next. Nadia Shihata, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your perspective. Excellent analysis as always, and thank you so much for the work that you do and the work that you've done.
Thank you again.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.